He is the most terrifying man in Western film history because his dinners consist of the most delicate parts of the human body. But the story begins with a special agent who possesses a rare ability. His name is Will, and he has an extraordinary sense of empathy. In simple terms, he can simulate a crime from the killer's perspective, step by step. Thanks to this cheat code ability, the FBI has solved many difficult cases, but each time Will uses it, his mental state takes a serious hit. So, he chose to leave the FBI and started teaching at a university. One day, Agent Jack came looking for Will. It turns out a string of disappearances has shaken a small town. 8 girls have gone missing over 8 months. No clues were left behind, and no bodies have been found. But after reviewing their files, Will noticed something strange. All the girls were of similar age and had strikingly similar appearances. Even their height and weight matched closely. Will believed the killer was searching for something like a twisted version of the golden ticket game from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and to protect the uniqueness of his ideal girl, the killer was likely to strike again. Will and Jack visited the home of the 8th victim, hoping Will's ability could uncover clues. Sure enough, after looking at some photos, Will immediately identified the house as the primary crime scene. When he entered the girl's bedroom, he froze. There on the bed lay a lifeless body. The coroner later found traces of deer antler in the wounds. It looked like she had been gored. Will noticed her neck had been completely crushed. She was strangled to death. Interestingly, deer antler is known for its healing properties. The killer may have been trying to make up for something. Soon after, the police performed an autopsy. They confirmed she died of suffocation and had several puncture wounds from antlers. But what puzzled the coroner most was that her liver had been removed then reinserted. Will suspected it had something to do with her meat. A background check revealed she had liver cancer. Will theorized the killer might be a cannibal. The more Will used his gift, the more damage it did. Jack, worried about Will's condition, contacted a famous psychiatrist named Hannibal. The moment Hannibal saw Will, he became fascinated by the shy young man. After just a few words, Hannibal had already built a psychological profile of him. Will didn't like that and he left immediately. Jack criticized Hannibal for being too blunt, but Hannibal told him that Will's ability is a double-edged sword, powerful, yet dangerous. Hannibal offered to help them with the case. Not long after, another girl's body was found in the woods. Again, punctured by antlers. Again missing an organ. Everyone believed it was the same killer, but Will disagreed. He argued that the real killer wouldn't leave the body exposed. This had to be a copycat. Will theorized the killer had a daughter. The victims looked like her. Maybe she was leaving, and the killer couldn't cope. At that moment, Will seemed to understand everything. The next day, Hannibal brought Will 2 boxes of high-protein breakfast and apologized. Will accepted. Then, the two drove to a construction site. The coroner had found metal shavings on the last victim's clothes. Will traced them here. Looking through employee records, one file caught his eye. A man named Hobbs. When the record keeper couldn't answer his questions, Will decided to take the files for further study. Just as they were about to leave, Hannibal dropped the papers on purpose. While Will picked them up, Hannibal walked back inside, wrapped a tissue around the phone, and made a call.
They know.
The next lead took Will to a remote cabin, but at the front door, he found a woman with her throat slit. Will rushed to save her, but she died from a severed artery. Enraged, Will stormed into the cabin only to find Hobbs holding a knife to his daughter's neck. Hobbs raised the blade to kill her. In a split second, Will fired multiple shots and killed him, but the girl's throat had already been cut. Will tried desperately to save her, but without medical gear, he was helpless. Just then, Hannibal arrived, calmly stopped the bleeding, and got her into an ambulance. Later, Will searched Hobbs' home and found a house filled with antlers, but the other girls' bodies were missing. Will concluded Hobbs had helped. There was no way he could consume that much flesh alone. The truth would have to wait until Hobbs' daughter regained consciousness, and from that moment, Will and Hannibal's lives became inseparably entwined. Soon after, a horrific new murder took place. The highest form of killing? Planting living people like seeds. 3 children found human hands sprouting from the soil, each within 4 tube. The mushrooms nearby grew wildly. The police uncovered 9 corpses beneath the field, all at different stages of decay. Jack noticed faint tire tracks and animal traps nearby. The killer clearly wanted no outside interference. The coroner concluded that the victims were buried alive. He gave them oxygen masks, injected nutrients into their veins to keep them alive just long enough for their bodies to decay and feed the mushrooms, erasing his traces in the process. No one knew how to respond. Will closed his eyes and activated his gift. He stepped back, mentally recreating the killer's every move. Then another hallucination. He saw Hobbs again. The team rushed to pull him out of his vision, but another victim was already gone. Terrified, Will turned to Hannibal once more for help. He told Hannibal everything. Hannibal explained it was psychological overload. When someone kills, they release a chemical called endorphin. It could be triggering Will's visions. He told Will not to worry, no treatment needed. Then they began analyzing the mushroom case. Why were the arms left above ground? Hannibal asked. Was it symbolic, letting souls escape flesh? Or did the killer have a twisted obsession? Will believed the killer used the victims as fertilizer, not crops. The mushrooms were the real harvest. Hannibal's insights gave Will an idea. He rushed back to the lab and re-examined the bodies. This time, the coroner found something new. They didn't die from the mushrooms. They died from diabetic kidney failure. Will guessed they were diabetic before death. The killer could be a doctor or pharmacist. He altered their meds, induced comas, then buried them alive, sustaining life with sugar just long enough to grow his mushroom farm. Now that the police had destroyed his farm, he'd likely start another. They checked nearby hospitals and pharmacies. One suspect stood out, Eldon, but when Jack came looking, Eldon had vanished. Will found a new victim buried in Eldon's car trunk, still alive. Thanks to quick rescue, later, they found an expose on Eldon's computer. The police assigned a mentally unstable man to investigate the mushroom case. It revealed confidential case details and tipped Eldon off. Furious, Jack confronted a tabloid reporter, Lowndes, and warned her, if she wrote another story on Will, he'd have her arrested and locked up. Lowndes backed down, but the next day, a suspended officer who leaked the info to her was murdered by Eldon. By the time Jack arrived, Eldon was gone. Lowndes said Eldon kept asking about Will. He believed humans and fungi shared neural traits, and Will was the key to his vision. He wanted to bury Abigail alive. Eldon disguised himself as a surgeon and entered the hospital. Jack called Will, but Abigail had already vanished. Will searched frantically and found Eldon. He shot Eldon in the shoulder to stop him. With Eldon restrained, Will asked why he kidnapped Abigail.
Well, you would have. You would have. If you walk through a field of mycelium, they know you are there. They know you are there. The spores reach for you as you walk by. I know who you're reaching for. I know. Abigail Hobbs. You should have let me plant her. You would have found her in a field where she was finally able to reach back.
Their eerie conversation felt like two madmen understanding each other. With Hannibal's help, Will solved another serial case, but his condition worsened. He returned to Hannibal for therapy, giving Hannibal the perfect chance to mold him. Will fell deeper into Hannibal's lies. His humanity was slowly descending into darkness. A 16-year-old girl once helped her father with a hunt. The moment she touched the animal's fur, she awoke in horror. Her father was Hobbs, the monster who killed 8 girls. It had been 24 days since Will killed Hobbs, but 2 mysteries remained. First, the 9th victim, killed the same way, but not by Hobbs. Will believed the copycat was a highly intelligent psychopath trying to outdo Hobbs. He even called Hobbs the day he was killed. Second, the bodies of the other 7 girls were still missing. With Abigail awake, more truths were expected to surface. Jack suspected Abigail was Hobbs' accomplice or even another cannibal. To get answers, he had Hannibal and Will visit her in the hospital, but Abigail claimed ignorance. To her, her father had always been gentle. She couldn't believe he killed her mother. As her emotions spiraled, Jack decided to take her back to her home, hoping familiar surroundings would spark memories. They found the door vandalized with a cannibal symbol, but Abigail remained calm. She even asked if this was where her mother died. While sorting through her father's things, she made a bold suggestion: reenact the crime. A female officer objected, saying this was just to help her heal. Then Abigail revealed something chilling. They might never find the other bodies because her father used every part. He once made pipe glue from elk bones. The girls' remains were likely turned into glue. 2. Hannibal asked to visit Hobbs' old workshop. Meanwhile, Lowndes stirred up more trouble. He told the victim's brother about Abigail's return, urging him to confront her. The boy found Abigail talking with her friend and shouted, "So this is how you lured my sister?" Will and Hannibal arrived just in time, and the boy ran off. They chased him into the woods, but Hannibal picked up a bloody rock later used to clear him of copycat suspicion. The next day, police led Abigail to Hobbs' workshop. She recalled vivid memories. Her father crafted everything himself. Antlers became decorations, skins became cushions, and organs, delicacies. Then it hit her: he may have fed her the girl's organs. Before attacking her, Hobbs had said, "They all died for you." Just then, Blood dripped onto her forehead. Several individuals looked up to find the wooden floor stained with a deep red hue. Realizing something was amiss, Will hurried upstairs to investigate. He discovered a lifeless body suspended on a structure adorned with antlers. The victim was none other than Abigail's close friend. Analyzing the wounds and the positioning of the body, Will deduced it was the work of an imitator. He then found traces of skin and blood inside the victim's mouth. Hannibal suggested that Abigail should return home, as she might be in danger and potentially targeted by this new perpetrator. Upon arriving home, they encountered the persistent tabloid journalist, Lowndes. This marked his third unauthorized entry into a crime scene. As Hannibal prepared to escort him out, Lowndes mentioned seeing a suspicious individual outside the cabin earlier, the same boy who had confronted Abigail. Hannibal relayed this information to the authorities. Meanwhile, inside the cabin, Abigail recalled her father's words, "Nothing goes to waste." She hastily retrieved a knife and cut open a pillow, revealing strands of hair inside. At that moment, the boy from earlier appeared, insisting he wasn't responsible for the girl's demise. Panicked, Abigail attempted to flee, but the boy grabbed her and pinned her against the wall. In the ensuing struggle, Abigail inadvertently inflicted a fatal wound on him. Hannibal, noticing the blood on Abigail's hands, sensed that something significant had occurred. He incapacitated the approaching detective and followed Abigail to the scene. Upon seeing the deceased boy, Hannibal recognized that this incident extended beyond mere self-defense. He offered Abigail two choices: confess to the authorities, who might not believe her, or allow him to conceal the incident. Under Hannibal's influence, Abigail chose the latter. Together, they staged the scene to suggest the boy had fled due to guilt. Subsequent DNA analysis linked the boy to evidence found in the previous victim's mouth, indicating a 99% match. This revelation positioned the boy as the primary suspect. Aligning with Hannibal's intentions, Hannibal had preserved a blood-stained stone. Anticipating this outcome, Abigail then realized that Hannibal was the mysterious individual who had previously warned her father. When questioned, Hannibal calmly referred to it as his most significant mistake. They agreed to keep each other's secrets. However, Abigail's expression hinted at complexities beneath the surface. What is the pinnacle of manipulation? Convincing someone to willingly accept their fate. In a small town, a family of 4 was found deceased in their home, all bearing serene expressions. FBI agent Will Graham employed his unique empathetic abilities to delve into the case. Through his perspective, the crime scene was reconstructed. It began as a typical family dinner, disrupted by an uninvited guest who was seated at the head of the table. Will theorized that the intruder eliminated 3 family members before turning to Mrs. Trelawney. However, the possibility of a crime of passion was dismissed, as the Trelawneys were childhood sweethearts managing a successful real estate business. They had 3 sons, one of whom had disappeared the previous year after being seen entering a camper van. Will observed that the family's portrait appeared forced, lacking genuine happiness. This suggested underlying issues within the family. The forensic team noted no signs of forced entry, but ballistic analysis indicated the shooter fired from a lower position, possibly seated or crouching. A pair of size 6 sneakers was found at the scene, with wear patterns suggesting the wearer had uneven leg lengths, a common trait in adolescence. Further investigation revealed 7 distinct footprints, leading to the theory that the perpetrators were 3 teenagers. Fingerprints on a gaming console identified a 13-year-old boy named Connor, who had also been reported missing 10 months prior. Connor's family, like the Trelawneys, had 3 sons. Authorities feared Connor's family might be the next target. Tragically, they arrived too late. Connor's family had been killed in a manner similar to the Trelawneys. This time, the assailant had to fire twice to subdue Mrs. Connor and took a gift meant for her, possibly to erase her maternal identity. A charred body was discovered in the fireplace. Raising further questions, Will compared the profiles of the missing boys. Seeking connections, the forensic team found that bullets from both crime scenes matched those from a previous case involving a boy named Lincoln, who had killed his mother. Lincoln, despite his compassionate nature and involvement in animal welfare, had committed a heinous act and was suspected to be leading these crimes. The pattern of the murders suggested a southward trajectory, with each incident occurring approximately 500 miles apart. Jack proposed identifying missing boys within this range to apprehend the culprits. Will suggested narrowing the search to boys from affluent families who exhibited signs of Stockholm Syndrome, a condition where victims developed sympathy for their captors. The investigation focused on a boy named Chris. Will informed Jack that these boys were under the influence of a woman posing as a maternal figure, aiming to establish a new family by eliminating their original ones. Jack and his team intervened at Chris's home, Finding the missing boy's present, Chris attempted to flee but was stopped near a pool. The true orchestrator emerged from a warehouse, but a timely intervention by a forensic expert prevented further tragedy. With the perpetrator neutralized, the case was resolved. However, a subsequent incident deeply unsettled Will. A couple was found kneeling beside a bed, their backs altered to resemble wings. Jack deduced that the assailant had restrained them before performing the gruesome act. The forensic team suggested the killer might have a background in fishing or historical practices, as similar methods were used by certain ancient groups. Evidence indicated the killer remained at the scene, even sleeping on the bed. Vomiting at the scene suggested possible nervousness. Will, however, believed the killer felt they had elevated the victims' souls. To understand the killer's mindset, Will reenacted the scenario, lying on the bed with his eyes closed. The next day, forensic analysis revealed the victims had been sedated before the procedure, and traces of cancer medication were found in the vomit. Will began to question his own perceptions, experiencing worsening hallucinations and sleepwalking. Seeking clarity, he turned to Hannibal, who attributed his condition to post-traumatic stress and subtly suggested that Jack's demands were the root cause. Hannibal's influence over Will deepened. Another case emerged, a security guard found hanging at a construction site, with an unusual item discovered nearby. Will theorized that the killer was attempting a transformation, aspiring to become an angelic being. Jack dismissed this idea, causing tension between them. As the investigation progressed, the victims were identified as fugitives, not the innocent individuals they appeared to be. Will's sleep disturbances escalated, leading him to seek further counsel from Hannibal. Their relationship grew increasingly complex. Will speculated that the killer viewed themselves as a creator of angels, though in reality, they were deeply disturbed. Hannibal suggested that Will could find peace by shedding his burdens. During their conversation, Hannibal commented on Will's scent, implying a need for a new fragrance. This hinted at Hannibal's darker intentions. Meanwhile, Jack confirmed the perpetrator's identity by comparing data from the National Cancer Center. The suspect, named Crawford, is a 35-year-old male truck driver, married with 2 children. He was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer 5 months ago but hasn't returned home for the past 4 months. Jack then located Crawford's ex-wife to inquire if he had contacted her recently. She explained that they divorced after his diagnosis and haven't been in touch since. Will asked if Crawford held any religious beliefs, but she stated he was an atheist. However, Crawford once had a near-death experience during a severe farm fire in his childhood. A firefighter who rescued him mentioned that an angel must have been watching over him. Armed with this information, Jack and Will promptly headed to the farm. Upon entering the barn, they discovered that Crawford had taken his own life, positioning himself as an angel suspended from the rafters. Will observed Crawford's lifeless body with a hint of envy. Crawford had found his own peace, while Will felt trapped in a life he didn't desire. Assisting Jack in investigations, at that moment, Will made a decision. He expressed his anguish, and Jack, unable to dissuade him, told Will to do what he felt was necessary. After Jack left, Will stood motionless. Suddenly, the previously suspended Crawford appeared to descend from the rafters. The scene shifted, revealing it was a hallucination experienced by Will. It seemed Hannibal's influence on Will was nearing completion. In a hospital known for its high mortality rate, a young nurse was found dead, her body subjected to various medical procedures, and her organs removed. Who could commit such an act against an 18-year-old girl? Time shifted back to the present. Jack and Will received a report from Dr. Chilton, the director of a psychiatric hospital, stating that the Chesapeake Ripper, missing for 2 years, had returned. According to Chilton, the suspect, Gideon, was a former surgical doctor. 2 years ago, he was incarcerated for the murder of his ex-wife's family. Just last night, Gideon attempted to end his life by biting his tongue. By the time guards found him, he was unconscious. He was immediately taken to the infirmary for emergency treatment. Will questioned why, in such a secure facility, a prisoner would be left alone with a nurse. Chilton explained that Gideon had shown exemplary behavior over the past 2 years and actively participated in psychological therapy. The guards believed he was unconscious, so they allowed him to be alone with the nurse, not anticipating the tragic outcome. Hearing this, Will began reconstructing the crime scene in his mind. The perpetrator used a hidden metal piece in his palm to unlock his handcuffs while the nurse was administering N4. He then incapacitated the nurse, preventing her from calling for help. Subsequently, he removed her eyes and used nearby medical equipment to end her life. Returning to reality, Will was shaken, momentarily fearing he was the perpetrator. Despite Chilton's insistence that Gideon was the Chesapeake Ripper, Will believed there were inconsistencies. Gideon's impulsive behavior contrasted with the calculated methods of the Ripper. To determine the truth, Will and criminal psychologist Bloom planned a joint interrogation of Gideon. Surprisingly, Gideon, who previously denied being the Ripper, now confessed. He claimed he initially denied it because he disliked the nickname. Will pointed out that Gideon mutilated bodies post-mortem, whereas the Ripper tortured victims while they were alive. Gideon responded that he didn't need to prove anything. Suddenly, Will realized someone wanted them to believe Gideon was the Ripper. That evening, Jack consulted Hannibal for psychological therapy. 2 years prior, when the Ripper began his spree, Jack led the investigation. He enlisted Miriam, a dual PhD in psychology and criminology, to assist. However, Miriam disappeared during a pursuit and remains missing. Back in the present, a forensic analysis revealed that the victim's wounds matched those from the Ripper's previous cases. Based on the injuries, Gideon appeared to be the Ripper. Yet, Will remained skeptical, believing the true Ripper was still at large. The investigation reached an impasse. Soon after, Jack received a late-night call from Miriam. The next day, the police investigated all telecom records but found no trace of the 2:46 a.m. call. Some speculated Jack might have been dreaming, but he was certain it was real. He suspected it might have been a recording left by Miriam before her disappearance. The killer made the call on purpose to let the authorities know that someone was copying his signature crimes. Since the killer seemed obsessed with his identity as the Ripper, Jack decided to solidify Gideon's role as the culprit, hoping to lure the real one out. Tabloid reporter Lowndes was the perfect collaborator for this plan. News of the Ripper's capture quickly went viral, but when Hannibal saw the article, a subtle flash of anger crossed his face. Meanwhile, Jack visited the psychiatric hospital to question Gideon. To Jack's surprise, Gideon accurately recited details about Miriam and even claimed he had ended her life and removed her heart. Just as Jack was about to ask more questions, he received a phone call from home and the voice on the other end was Miriam's. Jack rushed back home with a team immediately. Forensics lifted 3 fingerprints from the phone, one of which might have belonged to the actual perpetrator. A single strand of golden hair was also discovered on the pillow, and Miriam was known for her blonde hair. Fingerprint analysis confirmed that the print on the phone matched Miriam's. Will believed the killer was trying to manipulate Jack's guilt over Miriam's disappearance, using it as a twisted form of revenge. Cut to Hannibal hosting a dinner party for Bloom and Dr. Chilton. While serving the meal, Hannibal proudly announced the main course, a very healthy lamb. The three began discussing the Chesapeake Ripper case. Bloom offered 3 possibilities. 1. Gideon really was the long-sought Chesapeake Ripper. 2. Gideon had developed a delusion, believing he was the Ripper. 3. Someone had pressured Gideon into confessing. Chilton's expression shifted noticeably, as he tried to distance himself from suspicion. But after dinner, Hannibal gave Chilton a subtle warning. If I were you, I'd try to take control of his thoughts. Maybe you already have. Compared to Dr. Bloom, I'm more tolerant of unconventional behavior. It was clear Hannibal was sending a message. Cut to the police station, where Jack received another call from Miriam. This time, they managed to trace the signal, but when they arrived at the location, all they found was a severed arm. The killer had left a note at the scene. The sight was enough to shake Jack deeply. That evening, Jack confided in Hannibal. He said he had always hoped Miriam was still alive, but the Ripper used that hope to blind him. For a brief moment, Jack truly believed she had survived. As Jack spoke, Hannibal drifted into memory. Years ago, Miriam had linked a victim to Hannibal. At the time, Hannibal was still a surgical intern. The victim had died from a hunting accident, and Hannibal had treated him. Miriam had come looking for clues, but too much time had passed, and Hannibal claimed he didn't remember much. Fortunately, Hannibal had kept a journal and asked Miriam to wait while he retrieved it. As she searched, Miriam discovered a sketch that matched a recently found body. Before she could react, Hannibal rendered her unconscious. Cut to the present. Hannibal attended a classical music concert. After the show, a glamorous guest approached him. She teased Hannibal about not hosting dinners recently and praised his culinary skills. She said watching him cook was like witnessing a masterpiece unfold. Every dish was like a piece of art, unforgettable to anyone who tasted it. Hannibal responded that the dinners would resume soon, but we must respect what we consume. He added, every dish represents a living soul. Back home, Hannibal opened a long-forgotten menu notebook. Each name matched a different recipe, and with the return of the dinner parties, the town's peace was about to be disrupted. Soon after, the police received a report of a body found in a hotel bathtub. One of the victim's kidneys was missing. Blood was traced from the bed all the way to the bathroom. The scene closely resembled previous Ripper cases, with one twist this time. The victim's heart was removed, but only the kidney was taken. Curious, Will used his special ability to mentally reconstruct the crime scene. He noticed signs of a violent struggle, suggesting the victim had awoken from deep sedation and became aggressive. During the fight, both the victim and the killer were knocked unconscious. When the killer realized the victim's heart had stopped, he cut him open and began pressing internally. Will realized the killer was trying to save the victim's life. Although the method resembled the Ripper's, the motive behind this case was completely different. Will suspected the killer was likely a medical student or a recently graduated surgical intern. He might have been looking to make some extra cash by taking on risky freelance work. Clearly, this wasn't the work of the Chesapeake Ripper, but Jack, still fixated on the Ripper, thought otherwise. Will tried to reassure Jack, saying, "You'll catch the Ripper, you just need to be patient." To speed up the investigation, Will turned to Hannibal for help, hoping his expertise in psychology could offer insight. After listening to Will's summary, Hannibal suggested that the inconsistencies in each case could mean there was more than one killer. If the organs were removed with precision, they were probably being sold on the black market. Soon after, a second body was discovered. This time, the victim had been severed in half. Both the heart and kidneys were missing. It seemed the killer was trying to complete what he failed to do in the previous case. The coroner believed both murders were committed by the Ripper, but Will strongly disagreed. Under Hannibal's subtle influence, the FBI began to lose direction. Meanwhile, Hannibal started preparing for another one of his exclusive dinner parties. He took out his recipe cards. Each name on the list matched a dish he planned to serve. A custom suit tailor would be turned into pâté, a bookstore manager into beef stew, and the IT consultant, baked with cheese and lamb brain. He prepped the ingredients and stored them carefully in his fridge. At the same time, the police were reporting 3 new victims, each missing different organs. Previously, they had been waiting for organ donations. Now, someone was taking them all. Elsewhere, Hannibal was already making sausages. Jack speculated the killer might be trafficking organs. While one medical examiner thought they were being smuggled to China, another examiner objected, pointing out that traditional Chinese culture discourages voluntary organ donation. Jack cut off the debate and asked Will, "How many killers are we dealing with?" Will answered, 2. One of them is definitely the Ripper. Later, surveillance footage from the hotel revealed something unusual. A private ambulance had been parked outside during the crime scene investigation. Once Jack and his team arrived, the ambulance quickly left. The forensic team theorized that the killer had performed the surgery in the vehicle. Jack rushed to tell Will and happened to run into Hannibal. Jack invited Hannibal to join them in pursuing the suspect at the private company. According to the fleet manager, the ambulance hadn't been scheduled for service, but a part-time driver had taken it to a repair shop. When they arrived, the vehicle was missing. Using signal tracking, the police eventually found the stolen ambulance. When they opened the doors, the killer was mid-operation, removing a victim's organ. Jack raised his weapon and ordered him to stop, but the man refused. He claimed that if he stopped now, the victim would die. Jack shouted for Hannibal and asked if the man was telling the truth. Hannibal said the killer's technique was clumsy and offered to assist with the procedure. Hannibal put on gloves and took over. Thanks to Hannibal's help, Jack was able to arrest the suspect, but as Hannibal moved with surgical precision, Will couldn't help but feel a flicker of doubt. As the organ case came to a close, Hannibal's elaborate dinner party was finally ready. At the gathering, Will asked Hannibal a question, "With your surgical skill, why didn't you choose to help people instead?" Hannibal replied that he once failed during a procedure, and watching life fade away disturbed him. Now, he preferred the art of cooking. His explanation was convincing enough to calm Will's suspicion. As applause filled the room, Hannibal's signature feast began. Then came a crime unlike anything seen in TV history, one that blurred the line between horror and art. A man's body had been turned into a human cello, standing at the center of a stage. Jack explained the victim was a trombone player in an orchestra who had gone missing after a performance. Now, he had reappeared like part of a twisted show. Using his empathy ability, Will reconstructed the killer's actions. He saw how the throat had been cut, and the strings of the cello inserted along the vocal cords. White powder at the wound site was identified as rosin used to make the strings sing. It appeared the killer was in a hurry to perform to let his creation play a unique tune. As Will plucked a string, a burst of applause echoed through the theater. He turned and saw Hobbs, the man he had already taken down. Snapping back to reality, Will realized his hallucinations were getting worse. He sent the body to the lab for analysis. Forensics found traces of rosin, olive oil, calcium carbonate, and silica. The muscles and fats surrounding the vocal cords had been treated with a nitrate compound. Will explain that the silica had hardened the vocal cords, enhancing the sound quality perfect for the killer's performance. The forensic expert believed the killer had used catgut string to manipulate the body. Catgut has long been considered one of the best materials for making musical instruments. Will explain that committing a murder this way would require not only precision but an incredibly strong mindset. Due to Will's constant use of his empathy ability, his mental state was beginning to unravel. Not only was he seeing past killers at crime scenes, but strange sounds had also started to echo through his mind. To get things under control, Will turned to Hannibal for help. He hoped Hannibal could provide insight into the psychological state of the killer during the murder. After doing some research, Hannibal noted that the earliest instruments in history were flutes, many of them carved from human bones. Will said this case felt more like a performance than a murder. Hannibal replied that every life is like a song, and the killer might be trying to compose something unique using a human body. A century ago, people used catgut for stringed instruments. Fresh intestines were soaked in water, dried, scraped clean with a branch, and then cut into thin strips. Once dried, they became fine instrument strings, but the process was delicate and the material didn't last long. To extend the string's durability, people would coat it with olive oil. Judging by the killer's work, he wasn't just skilled, he was also mentally unstable. Will believe the killer was possibly seeking someone like himself. To a true lover of music, killing the audience would be an insult to the art. The killer might be trying to prove his musical method to someone specific. Cut to Hannibal's clinic, where an unusual guest arrived. Franklin had visited Hannibal before, hoping he would analyze his friend Budge, but Hannibal had declined. This time, Franklin came again, concerned that Budge was acting unstable. He said Budge often spoke about slashing people's throats and turning them into string instruments. Given the human cello case, Franklin suspected Budge might be the killer. He was torn about whether to report him. Indeed, Budge's real target was Hannibal, which meant Will's suspicions were spot on. Soon after, Hannibal visited a local instrument shop. He knew Budge was the creator of the human cello, and Budge knew exactly why Hannibal had come. During their exchange, both agreed that the recent murder might actually help the orchestra. They needed a new trombone player anyway. Later, Hannibal invited Budge to his home. Since it was on his own turf, Hannibal got straight to the point. The FBI was closing in, and it was only a matter of time before Budge was caught. Budge didn't seem concerned. He calmly said if anyone came for him, he'd take them out, turn them into strings, and then kill Franklin too. Hannibal asked him to spare Franklin, but Budge shifted his tone. He admitted he once planned to make Hannibal into a cello string too. After following him out of town, at that, Hannibal's expression darkened. Budge said he admired Hannibal and believed they were alike. The human cello had been his personal gift to Hannibal. What Budge didn't know was that Hannibal had no intention of letting his secret identity as the Ripper be exposed. Just as Hannibal was preparing to act, the doorbell rang. It was Will, arriving unexpectedly. Will said the cello case has been keeping him up at night, and even in sleep, he could hear cello strings playing in his mind. Hearing this, Hannibal came up with an idea. He told Will that a music store owner might have information related to the murder. The next day, Will returned with 2 officers to investigate. In a brief conversation, Budge accidentally exposed himself. He mentioned case details that had never been released to the public. Will tried to arrest him, but his hallucinations returned. He thought he heard cries for help outside and rushed out, only to realize it was a hallucination. When Will returned, one of the officers was lying in a pool of blood. After calling for backup, Will headed alone into the basement, but all he found was a fellow officer submerged in water. As Will moved closer, Budge suddenly attacked from the shadows. Will managed to shoot him just in time. Injured, Budge fled to Hannibal's home. He told Hannibal this was goodbye. He was going to carry out his plan to kill Franklin. Franklin, unaware of the danger, pleaded with Budge to turn himself in. Hannibal asked Franklin to leave, saying he would stay behind. Just as Budge was about to reveal Hannibal's dark secret, Hannibal struck first, snapping his neck. Budge pulled out a catgut whip, but Hannibal quickly dodged and retreated. Despite his strength, Hannibal wasn't a match for Budge in close combat. Luckily, he knew the terrain and used a ladder to break Budge's arm, then delivered a final blow to his throat. As Budge fell, Hannibal calmly took out a handkerchief and wrapped it around a stag-shaped sculpture. By the time Jack and Will arrived, Hannibal had staged the scene to look like a home invasion. With the case wrapped up, the town returned to brief peace, but it didn't last. Not long after, another gruesome discovery shook the already struggling town. On the beach, police found a 30-meter-high totem pole made from 17 dried human bodies. Scattered around the base were 7 unearthed graves. Some of the deceased had passed away years ago, others just days prior. Only the victim atop the structure had been placed there recently. Jack theorized that merely ending their lives no longer satisfied the perpetrator, leading him to exhume the bodies as a form of desecration. However, Will found no evidence of such desecration on the victims. To understand the killer's motive for constructing the totem pole, Jack cleared the scene, allowing Will to reconstruct the events. Will deduced that the killer had meticulously planned the structure, gathering materials in advance and placing each body with precision. The victim at the top had witnessed the entire process before being killed and positioned as the final piece. After this realization, Will found himself in Hannibal's home, uncertain how he arrived there, considering the crime scene was 3.5 hours away. This concerned him. Hannibal suggested that Will's memory lapses were due to his intense investigative methods. He believed Will's consciousness was detaching as a defense mechanism against psychological strain. Hannibal felt Will's current condition made him unfit for continued work with the FBI. Will, however, believed his unique abilities could still help save lives. He considered consulting a doctor. Suspecting a neurological issue, Hannibal cautioned that if Will committed a crime during a hallucination, the consequences would be severe. This warning unsettled Will. Will approached Jack to resign but ultimately decided against it. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of the totem pole revealed that the top victim died from a heart wound, with other injuries occurring post-mortem. Will believed this victim held special significance to the killer. Given his prominent placement, the other 16 bodies were also victims of homicide. Will compiled information on the cases. In 1986, 28-year-old Anthony died in a car accident. In 2001, 60-year-old Parkham succumbed to a heart attack. In 2006, 25-year-old Peter died from gas poisoning at home. 7 unidentified bodies were buried on the beach. Each death appeared accidental, with no signs of torture. The killer seemed to enjoy the act of killing without detection. A forensic expert identified the first victim as Marshall, who died in a fight 40 years ago. The perpetrator was never found. At this point, Jack informed Will that Boyle's body had been discovered. The boy Abigail had previously killed. Local police found the body but couldn't determine the time of death due to it being stored on ice. Jack wanted Abigail to view the body to confirm if Boyle was the one who attacked her. Despite objections from Will and Bloom, Jack insisted on Abigail's involvement, suspecting her complicity in the Hobbs case. Abigail appeared nervous upon seeing the body. Bloom attempted to cover the body, but Jack stopped her, aiming to observe Abigail's reactions. However, Abigail maintained her composure, effectively dispelling suspicion. Bloom criticized Jack's approach, asserting that Boyle's death was unrelated to Abigail. Later, Hannibal confronted Abigail about exhuming the body without his consent. Expressing concern over potential exposure, Abigail assured him that she had cleared her name and that Jack wouldn't reopen the case. Subsequent investigations revealed that Joel and Marshall, 2 victims, were father and son. Though DNA tests showed no biological relation, Joel's mother died in a car accident 4 years after Marshall's murder. Will theorized that the killer had a deep affection for her, choosing not to include her in the totem pole. Police identified Lawrence as a prime suspect in the case but lacked sufficient evidence. Jack and Will visited Lawrence, who confessed to constructing the totem pole and recounted his actions. Will's revelations deeply unsettled Lawrence. With the case resolved, Will revisited Boyle's body. Using his empathic abilities to relive the murder, he realized that Abigail was responsible for Boyle's death. Will confronted Hannibal, who admitted to knowing and assisting Abigail in disposing of the body. Hannibal argued that Abigail acted in self-defense and that revealing the truth would ruin her life. Will believed they had no right to make decisions on Abigail's behalf.
We are her fathers now. We have to serve her better than Garrett Jacob Hobbs.
After some contemplation, Will agreed to keep the secret. However, Abigail was distressed. Having previously helped her father lure victims, she feared that refusing her father's demands would have led to her own demise. Meanwhile, Will's hallucinations worsened. He experienced memory lapses and, during a crime scene reconstruction, imagined himself as the killer, inflicting wounds on the victim. That had never happened before. Jack grew concerned about Will's mental state and advised him to step back and get some rest, but Will insisted he was fine and returned to the crime scene. Based on the scene, it looked like the killer and the victim knew each other. The medical examiner found skin fragments under the victim's nails but no trace of blood. It suggested the killer had a severe skin condition. That night, Will went to see Hannibal. Though he claimed to be okay, Will admitted he was worried about his mental state, unsure if it was the case reconstructions or something wrong with his body. Will felt as though his life was slipping away. Hearing this, Hannibal handed him a notebook and asked him to draw a clock while imagining where he was in that moment. Will's sketch was chaotic numbers misplaced and the hands pointing in strange directions. It was clear he was under intense psychological stress and possibly suffering from brain damage. But Hannibal didn't tell Will the truth. He claimed it was just mental strain from recreating the crime scenes and told him to learn to manage the hallucinations. Still, Will suspected there might be something physically wrong with his brain. To ease his concerns, Hannibal recommended a neurologist, but he warned if the issue wasn't physical, Will would have to accept it was psychological. Will went in for a brain scan. Sure enough, the scan revealed severe inflammation in the right hemisphere of his brain, combined with his hallucinations and memory loss. The diagnosis pointed to anti-NMDA receptor encephalitis. If untreated, it would only get worse, but Hannibal instructed the doctor to hide the diagnosis from Will. Because the condition was so rare, the doctor saw it as a valuable research opportunity and agreed to cooperate. So the doctor told Will his results were normal, and the memory gaps were likely due to stress. He advised Will to come back once a week for follow-ups. Convinced it was a psychological issue, Will returned to the crime scene. He noted the time 10:36. When he looked down, he spotted a girl hiding under the bed. As he approached, the startled girl flipped the mattress and ran. Will reached out to grab her only to watch her skin peel off completely, like a latex glove. Suddenly, Will found himself in the middle of the forest. It was now 1:35 a.m. He'd lost 3 hours of memory. To confirm what he saw was real, Will brought the medical examiner to the scene. Together, they theorized the girl might have a rare infection, like staphylococcal scalded skin syndrome, where the skin separates from the tissue beneath. This could explain why no blood was found under the victim's nails. The next day, police matched the DNA from the killer's skin and identified a suspect named Georgia. Will interviewed Georgia's mother and learned that Georgia and the victim had once been best friends. But at age 9, Georgia was diagnosed with schizophrenia. She went missing during one of her treatments and was never seen again. Meanwhile, Hannibal was hosting a dinner with the doctor. During the meal, the doctor asked why Hannibal was so interested in Will. Hannibal explained that Will had an extraordinarily vivid imagination and a unique ability to empathize, making him an ideal subject for psychological study. That evening, Will returned to the hospital for another scan. It was after hours, no staff were around. When Will stepped off the machine, the doctor was nowhere to be found. As he dressed to leave, Will noticed blood on the office doorknob. He carefully opened the door and found the doctor dead in his chair. The police arrived, and forensics confirmed Will wasn't the killer. They also found traces of the same skin as the previous case on the murder weapon. Will believed the killer had followed him. That night, Will was startled awake by his dogs. He looked down and found Georgia hiding under his bed.
Your name is Georgia, imagine. You're not alone. We are here together.
My life.
Thanks to Will's help, Georgia began receiving treatment. Elsewhere, Jack met with Hannibal and asked if Georgia's condition could be cured. Hannibal explained she had Cotard syndrome, a rare disorder where patients can't recognize faces or objects. The only effective treatment was extreme electrotherapy. Later, Georgia's memories began to return. She remembered walking into the doctor's office that night, looking for Will, but instead, she saw Hannibal in a hazmat suit standing over the doctor's body. Hannibal calmly walked up and handed her the scissors. From Georgia's blurry perspective, Hannibal's face was unrecognizable. She became his scapegoat. Meanwhile, police discovered several human organs hanging from trees in the woods, each tied with a neat little bow. Will examined the scene and concluded it wasn't the work of the Chesapeake Ripper. The real Ripper would never abandon the organs. He would preserve them and turn them into gourmet meals. Will believed Gideon was trying to attract the real Ripper's attention. Forensics later found Gideon's footprints in the snow leading to the Baltimore State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, where Dr. Chilton worked. Will and Bloom rushed to the facility. Chilton, however, showed no remorse. He denied manipulating Gideon and insisted he had only acted within his role as a psychiatrist. Will was furious with Chilton's refusal to take responsibility. What happened next shook Will to his core.
The last thing Abel Gideon said to me is that he intends to tell everyone that he is the Chesapeake.
The autopsy revealed the victim had been killed first, then had their organs removed. Unlike the Ripper, Gideon had also destroyed the victim's brain. Will began hallucinating again. Water leaked from the morgue drawers, soaking Will's shoes. Fortunately, Jack's voice snapped him back to reality. Will believed Gideon was seeking revenge. Those doctors had filled his head with false memories. Now he was unraveling. Will predicted Gideon would strike again. Meanwhile, tabloid journalist Lowndes received a call from Dr. Paul, a famous criminal psychologist, interested in collaborating on a feature about Gideon. Excited, Lowndes agreed, but when she arrived, she was horrified. Dr. Paul had already been killed by Gideon, his tongue removed and fashioned into a Colombian necktie. It was a grotesque message. By the time Jack and his team got there, Gideon was gone and Lowndes had been taken. They learned that Dr. Paul had written a scathing article, calling Gideon a delusional narcissist tormented by mental illness. Now this wasn't just about catching the Ripper. Gideon wanted answers. As a surgeon, he used his skills to turn Paul's tongue into a grotesque message. Will noticed something clenched in Paul's hand. The crime had already been posted on a criminal psychology blog. Gideon clearly intended to document his actions to draw the real Ripper out. Reading the article, Hannibal showed a subtle flicker of anger. He despised vulgarity and disrespect above all else. The next day, another body turned up. Like Paul's, the victim's tongue had been removed and shaped into a tie, but this time, the victim was also missing an arm. Jack and his team arrived, but they were too late. Gideon had fled. Dr. Chilton lay barely alive, holding his organs in place, while Lowndes kept him breathing with a manual pump. Gideon watched them from a distance, waiting for the Ripper to appear. When he didn't, Gideon left only to run into a delirious Will. Will, now completely disoriented, brought Gideon to Hannibal's house. He asked Hannibal to confirm if Gideon was real or a figment of his imagination. Hannibal pushed Will further until Will had a seizure. Gideon was intrigued by Hannibal. He asked, "You're the real Chesapeake Ripper, aren't you?" Hannibal didn't answer directly. Instead, he planted a seed in Gideon's mind. He told him his personality had been split by doctors Dr. Bloom among them and offered to reveal her location. Will eventually recovered from his mild seizure. Hannibal claimed it had all been a hallucination. He told Will to wait while he called Jack to take him to the hospital. Then Hannibal left to find Dr. Bloom, warning that Gideon was still at large and she could be in danger. When Hannibal left, he intentionally left his car keys and sidearm on the table because he knew Will would go protect Bloom. Sure enough, by the time Hannibal returned, Will was already gone. Exhausted and weak, Will arrived at Dr. Bloom's hiding place. There, he came face to face with Gideon, who was observing from nearby. In Will's eyes, Gideon had become Hobbs the cannibal. As their conversation grew more intense, Will suddenly raised his gun and fired. Then he collapsed into the snow. From inside the house, Bloom saw everything through the window and rushed to get Will to the hospital. At that point, Will's body temperature had reached 40 degrees Celsius, and his white blood cell count was double the normal. Hannibal found Jack and recommended suspending Will from field work. Jack believed that if Will could neutralize Gideon in that condition, he would be fine, but Hannibal suggested revoking Will's gun permit, since his mental state was clearly deteriorating. If he lost control during one of his episodes, it could lead to tragedy. At this point, Hannibal's plan had already begun to take shape. Meanwhile, in the isolation chamber, a woman brushed her hair and accidentally triggered a fire. By the time the police arrived, she had been fatally burned. The victim was Georgia. After reviewing the security footage, the police confirmed that no one had entered the area during that time. The forensic team also found Georgia's anti-static wristband. All signs pointed to a tragic accident, because Georgia was a suspect in 2 prior cases. Jack believed she had taken her own life out of guilt, but Will wasn't convinced it didn't add up. The next day, forensics discovered a foreign object inside the chamber. At first, they thought it was part of the equipment, but tests revealed it was made of plastic, and oxygen-rich isolation chambers wouldn't include such flammable material. They also found traces of Georgia's hair on it. Will speculated that it had been a comb. In a high-oxygen environment, static from a plastic comb could easily ignite a fire. Jack concluded that the comb had been used in her self-destruction, but Will remained convinced it wasn't that simple. His analysis led Jack to reconsider everything. He began to suspect that the recent murders might be connected to Hobbs' copycat. It was likely the 2 individuals knew each other, or worse, were working together. All they needed now was to retrace Hobbs' past movements. They might uncover new evidence. Meanwhile, Will met with Hannibal to discuss the case. Since recovering from his fever, Will's thoughts had become clearer than ever. He now had a firm grasp on the copycat's methods. Hannibal tried steering Will away from the truth, but Will stood by his theory. Georgia had told him before her death that she saw a faceless man in the doctor's office. That man, Will believed, was the real copycat. Then it hit him: the copycat wasn't trying to frame Georgia. The real target was Will himself, and the killer was likely someone with access to case updates and investigative authority. Will said, I've mapped out the killer's behavior, now I need to reconstruct how he thinks. Watching Will inch closer to the truth, Hannibal began to feel conflicted. He didn't want to destroy the very creation he had spent so much effort shaping. Meanwhile, the police uncovered a disturbing link. Abigail had played a crucial role in helping Hobbs choose victims. Jack suspected that Abigail was the copycat all along. She may have ended her friend's life as a tribute to her father and taken out Boyle to cover up her crime. And as for the doctor in Georgia, perhaps it was out of growing bloodlust or maybe to send a message to someone else. But when Jack arrived at the facility to arrest Abigail, he discovered she was already gone, spirited away by Will. Jack immediately confronted Hannibal, demanding to know the nature of Will and Abigail's relationship. It gave Hannibal the perfect chance to mislead him.
Because I felt like I killed her.
Where was Will the night that Marissa Shore was killed?
He was supposed to be in his hotel room. I knocked on his door.
Meanwhile, Will had taken Abigail back to the cabin filled with antlers, a place full of memories. Both were overwhelmed with emotion, but Will's illness flared up again, and in a feverish hallucination, Abigail confessed everything. Suddenly, Will realized Jack had been right all along. In a whirlwind of emotion and accusations, Will lost his grip on reality. When he came to, he was on a plane heading back home. Back in her house, a terrified Abigail was met by Hannibal already waiting for her. In that moment, Abigail remembered something. Will often mentioned that the person who called Hobbs the day of the crime was the real copycat. That call had come from Hannibal. She finally realized the truth: Hannibal was the copycat. Meanwhile, Will, overwhelmed by confusion, tried to drink some water but instead coughed up a blood-soaked ear. With so many memory gaps, Will began to question his own reality. Desperate, he turned to Hannibal for help, exactly what Hannibal had hoped for. Hannibal had planted Abigail's ear at Will's home to make him believe he was responsible. Despite his fragmented memories, Will still believed he hadn't hurt Abigail. To clear his name, he returned with Jack to the FBI, but tests revealed Abigail's blood on Will's clothes and scratches all over his body. It looked like signs of a struggle. Even worse, investigators found human tissue from a prior victim on Will's fishing gear. All evidence pointed to Will as the killer, but in truth, it was all orchestrated by Hannibal. When Jack revealed the findings to Will, he was stunned. He denied everything, insisting he wasn't the copycat. After all, when the first copycat murder occurred, he hadn't even fallen ill yet. But with all the evidence stacked against him, there was nothing Jack could do. That's when Will realized someone was setting him up. Soon after, he was committed to a psychiatric facility, but during the transfer, Will escaped his restraints and fled. He returned to Hannibal, asking for help and understanding what was happening to him. Hannibal told him he had internalized the killer too deeply during his reconstructions.
What did you think when you first met Marissa Shore? How much like Abigail she was? Same height, same weight, hair color, same age.
How could I resist?
So much like his daughter, you may have wondered why Gary Jacob Hobbs didn't kill her himself. Dr. Sutcliffe wasn't killed, how Gary Jacob Hobbs killed. He was murdered, but you imagined yourself murdering a woman only days before.
This had blurred the line between his mind and the case. Hannibal offered to help him analyze the crime.
I want to see where Abigail died.
Soon, the two returned to the crime scene. The kitchen floor was still stained with blood, but Abigail's body had never been found. Hannibal implied that if Will had disposed of the body like Hobbs did, it might never be discovered. Then Will remembered something during one reconstruction with Abigail. She had suggested Hannibal play the mystery caller. Maybe she had known the truth all along. And still, Hannibal continued to twist Will's perception. He told Will, "Maybe you're not here to find a killer. Maybe you're here to find yourself."
I know who I am, but I am certain one of us killed Abigail.
Facing Hannibal at gunpoint, Will finally saw the truth. He said, "The scales have fallen from my eyes. Now I can finally see who you really are." But before he could pull the trigger, Jack burst in and stopped him. As Will collapsed, he imagined Hannibal merging with the demonic figure from his visions. In the end, Hannibal took Will's place, becoming the FBI's new profiler. And Will, framed by the man he once trusted, was left behind bars.
Hello, Dr. Lecter.
I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.